This film is about the context of community capacity building. We briefly look at both the policy background and also what it means working in and with communities. And it also looks at some of the challenges around organising community capacity building. The strategic guidance for community planning partnerships has come out. I hope you've read it lots of times, and you know, very ambitious. It's got some lovely ambitious statements in about empowering people, and that's always a good thing. What's the link there, you know, with community capacity building? How does that empower people? What does that mean in practice? You know, that's what the guidelines are particularly about. And we've got the National Performance Framework from government, which sounds very grand, and some of the lines in that are similar about personal development, learning, active citizenship, and this idea of a stronger, more resilient, supportive, influential and inclusive community. I mean, this is great terms, you know, and I'm all for it, but we need to unpack that a bit. What does that mean in practice? What do these lovely words mean in practice? The last one of these, the Commission on the Future of Public Service Delivery, government's response to it, again, has got some very important statements, if you like, around what this all means. And I like it. It's good stuff, really, about that it's about supporting the individual, family and community rather than it being based on bureaucratic lines or organisational structures and boundaries and so on. About involving people in the redesign and reshaping of their activities. So is that what this is about? How does community capacity building contribute to this? That's the sort of thing we want to look at actually in practice. What does that actually mean? So what a lovely term, community capacity building. I wonder who dreamt that one up. Here's a definition which I hope is fairly user-friendly. Activities, resources and support that strengthens the skills, abilities and confidence of people and community groups to take effective action and leading roles in the development of communities. We spent a lot of time on that to try to avoid too much jargon and also make it sort of people-based, community group-based. We don't have big terms like infrastructure in that definition. We hope that definition can be useful and used by people and people in communities. So that's the starting point. That's what we're assuming it's kind of defined as, if you like. I've got a few concerns about the term community capacity building. To me, it is a bit of jargon, basically. I wouldn't have chosen the term. I've written a few books about it, but I don't like the term capacity building. I think it's potentially rather patronising. I prefer something like community strengths. To me, that is more down-to-earth language, and it conveys the idea we're talking about strengths here. We're talking about building from strengths, from abilities, skills, confidence, talent, gifts that's already in communities, and I think that's really important. It does sound a bit top-down as well often, you know, this idea that the community out there somehow needs to be kind of built up, you know, and you know, there's a big gap in things, and we're okay, you know, in our organisations, we're all right, but it's out there in the community, that's the problem. They've got to skill up in order to be able to participate. You know, I mean, that assumption I really object to be honest, but I do think it can be organised more in solidarity, in a bottom-up way of working with people, in partnership, in a nutshell. Again, that's what we want to look at. What does that mean in practice? How do you go about that? And the model is often about the gaps. They call it a deficit model. It's the idea that there's a big gap out there and we need to help people to fill it. Well, I don't think that's the starting point really. And another concern as well is that if you provide training and support for groups, will it be the ones that are already well organised who get in there? You know, who make use of our support and our resources or whatever is on offer, or learn from other groups? Will it be already well organised groups who get on to this sort of stuff? And that is a source of some concern as well, because surely this should be benefit for everybody in communities. That's what. So we need some approach that can cater for these concerns. These are some of my concerns and what people talk about a lot with this whole thing called capacity building. So we do need, ideally, a way of working with it that will tackle some of those concerns, and that's what I hope we'll have a look at. And it's a pretty tough environment now to be looking at building strength, strengthening communities, working with communities. As you probably know too well, what is happening at the moment, we have a loss of benefits going on for a lot of people. We have people at risk of losing their homes. We have high levels of unemployment. And as a part of all that, some of the areas I work, people are depressed. They are really up against it. They are not having an easy time at the moment, and it affects us all personally, coping with this stress. You know, then you come along and talk about building community groups or whatever, and some people are really struggling sometimes to get out of their house even. And that's, you know, got to be appreciated. Public services are really suffering from cutbacks in budgets. You know, it's very hard to sometimes do new things or expand and so on. And voluntary organisations as well. Voluntary sector grants or commission opportunities are sometimes being reduced. So we're really up against it in terms of the organisations that are a part of some of the support. While there's increased demand. What a contradiction in terms. You know, in the midst of this, at least in England, we're talking about the big society. We're meant to be doing more volunteering and more self-help in communities, and the very agencies that are supporting all that are losing their funding. So that's we're in a bit of a pickle, really. In the midst of all that, you know, the likes of me are going around talking about capacity building. Well, what a dilemma that is. What a challenge to be in this kind of context. So that's just for starters, some of the sort of challenges. Where does it happen? Who with? Well, I expect you're very familiar with all these different settings and groups. I mean, on the left side, we could call that community sector, smaller scale groups, basically, like residents groups, self-help, campaigning groups, faith groups, community of interest. We'll come to that in a minute. And that's mostly what I'm talking about today. I'm really talking about the grassroots. That's kind of my work experience has been mostly at the grassroots with different communities around the country. But there's also, you know, that other range of voluntary community organisations that are carrying out really important roles. Infrastructure, the organisations that provide services for smaller groups, perhaps of different types, campaigning groups nationally, and so on. So, you know, we're looking at the left-hand side, and I imagine a lot of you are working directly with those kind of groups day to day. So I just want to, you know, appreciate that's probably your sort of setting as well. So, as well as groups based in neighbourhoods, there's the term communities of interest, just in case anybody's not sure what that means. A lot of people have changed the way they think about community support through this term communities of interest. So just for starters, we've got communities of place. You know, people get together because they're in a street or they're in a village together, or neighbourhood or town or borough, you know, and they think about where they live, brings people together, and that's great. But also, it can be because of an identity that people get together. Like I work with the Leeds Multiple Sclerosis Self-Help Action Group, and the members of that who got together centrally in Leeds in their own building once a month or so, they would say, well, my experience of life is so different from my neighbour now, I don't relate to my neighbours anymore. I relate to my friends who are in the MS group. We get together, and that's what I feel I'm a part of, and that was an identity, and a pretty stressful one as well, what people were kind of going through there, and it was really important to them. But it might be an experience or a concern with communities of interest, like carers. You know, it's a concern you have, or a role that you have, that in some ways, obviously you won't necessarily have that all your life, where people are homeless or they're refugees. They may not be a refugee all their life. So this term community of interest has got two different meanings, if you like. It's often blurred together. And just, you know, examples, there's some groups that are we can call communities of interest, basically, and how people get organised. Okay, so with community capacity building, it's partly going to be groups, but also it's going to be individuals, you know, active individuals. We can call them active citizens, if you like. This is a framework on active citizens that some areas have been working on. It's just really a bit of a listing of different categories of active citizens, and in particular looking at sort of leadership roles. So it may be, you know, your kind of campaigner, sometimes a bit of a loose cannon, somebody who's working on environmental issues or whatever, or it might be somebody who's organising things, you know, the cricket club or festivals or so on, or somebody who's a volunteer in their street. And then on the right hand column we've got forms of representation, where people become a representative in some way of their community, be that area based or voluntary sector based. So that can be a part of capacity building, where we're looking at the ability of individuals to represent their neighbourhood or network. So that, again, I want to come back to that. There's also the whole issue of parish and ward councillors. How do they kind of fit in with all this?
In my role, community capacity building really means supporting the many community groups in the Bonnybridge and Banknock area. We have a large community resource, which is many community groups, which almost operate under this umbrella organisation of a community education association. So what that really means is the various community groups are members of the ComEd Association, and they represent the smaller community groups at a much higher level.
The challenges I face with CEIS capacity building are really the people that I'm involved with. Am I just really training and educating up, or supporting a kind of elite of activists, and what impact does that have on the wider community in terms of their own capacity? There's always a danger that you're working with the usual suspects, as the phrase goes, and don't appreciate or work on the ripple effect that builds up skills and knowledge throughout the community, because it's very easy to work with particular committees or groups of community activists. So that, for me, is a major challenge.
So what would a community look like if capacity building had been effective?